Welcome to the Ethics Experts, where we're elevating ethics and compliance and HR to the strategic level it's supposed to be.
What's up, Mike?
Hey, Nick. How are you?
Good, man. Welcome to the Ethics Experts. Glad to have you on.
Thank you for the invitation. I'm glad to be with you today.
Very good. So I always, let's just jump right in. You've had these two different careers. You've had one in finance, you've had one in commodities, before now becoming a consultant. How did sort of each of these chapters shape your view of the world? And how did that sort of feed into, the way that you practice compliance today?
That's an interesting question. Summarizing 30 years in 2 minutes.
Yeah, give me 2 minutes over the last 30 years, please.
So I had a finance career in a major U.S. corporation, DuPont, and then I moved into more of a compliance career in cargo. So the common thing in both was that you need to understand the business you're dealing with. What is important for the business? Where this business is heading, and then you need to think through the risks associated with that. In the one case, from a compliance perspective, obviously in the later years, and then before that on finance. So what was in finance was the same as for compliance is, what are the risks out there you need to consider? What do you think is important for leaders to see early? So because they can see everything what is going on the ground. In order to do that and understand that, you really need to understand what is a business activity. So if you're producing, in my first couple of years, I was in paint production. So what can go wrong in paint production? What are the inputs to paint production? What can go wrong? Which obviously is a link to commodity trading, because in paint, a lot of solvent and a lot of things which are close to crude oil are used. So, and there's a lot of commodity trading behind that, which I didn't understand at the time. So, and then when you go into compliance, obviously you need to understand the compliance risk you're dealing with. If that is ethical things from behavior perspective, it is bribery and corruption, is competition. And then specifically to commodity trading, obviously, is that linked to financial regulations, because they are doing a lot of activities in the financial markets. And you only understood that and could help them when you understood what the business really wanted to do, what they needed to do for whatever reason. And then that's the way how we went around that. So that's my learning from the two careers, is actually you understand A, the business, and B, the risks you're dealing with, and then you can design your compliance program. And that's what I'm doing today still. So I'm sitting there, I'm not asking compliance question, I'm not saying anything about compliance, but tell me about your business. What do you want to do? Why you want to do it, and how you're doing it?
So it's so interesting how compliance folks or our industry has sort of built a bit of a reputation, founded or unfounded is maybe another debate, but they've built this reputation of sort of stopping at the risks, or starting with the risks, or starting with the regulations or something, and not starting with the money. What business are we in, kind of to your exact point? And why do you think that is?
First thing to ask. The first thing is to ask where you want to be and why you need to be there. And if from there, come on, I can read the risk of working in the financial services industry, irrespective of the US or Europe or in Asia. It doesn't really matter. I can get that on AI today. Now, the big deal is, what does that mean for my business? How does it apply to my business? That's the question. And I can't take off the shelf something often. There is things you can take off the shelf, don't get me wrong. But when you take it off the shelf, you need to understand what that means to take off the shelf for your business. Does it address everything? Does it miss something? Is it 100% fit, which is usually not? People take things off the shelf. If you take KYC processes, there's tons of systems today. They take that off the shelf, do it. Unfortunate thing is, they're doing something which was designed, let's call it for the pharmaceutical industry, for lack of a different word, and you want to implement in commodities trading. It's not going to work. It's going to fail at some stage.
Let's go back. I always like to talk about, what kind of a kid were you? What were you like growing up? What pushed you into finance before you made this sort of compliance pivot?
So in finance, pushed me the numbers. So I had an affiliation with numbers. So languages was a huge problem for me in school. So I said, I need to do something with numbers. That's the only reason why I ended up in finance at the point. Working in the company in the town I was. I got, actually, when I did my apprenticeship, I applied for it. There were 300 candidates. Out of them were 6 selected to join. So, I don't know why then it took me. I have no idea until today. I haven't figured it out. But I was one out of two who had no connection to the company. So all of the others, the four out of the six, were some people where the father was a senior leader in the company or something, and two of them were not. So, and I was one of the two. So. So that's how I started, and then did my training there across all kinds of different things, and then moved into finance. So that's the reason why I ended up in finance originally. And I think one of the things which drove my career quite a bit was curiosity. So I was always interested to learn. I was always interested to understand how and why we're doing stuff. The question why I'm probably asked too often, particularly in my earlier years and maybe in my last couple of years in the corporation as well. I asked the why too often. So I need to hold myself back sometimes. But the question is for me most of the time, why I'm doing something. Why do you want me to do that? Why do you want me to run this way? So, and that's the reason I think where you become a good compliance leader is, obviously, technically, you need to understand your compliance domains and all the stuff which is going on there. But I think the real stuff in compliance leading comes from understanding the business, what the business needs.
When you were studying finance and you were getting involved with finance, what was it about it that was exciting to you, or what were you're great with numbers, you love numbers, and then you step into sort of this finance world, and there's all of these principles and these frameworks, underneath that sort of finance umbrella. What of those things kind of resonated with you, and what of those things made you feel like, okay, this is where I'm supposed to be?
So it was actually at a certain point when I got involved in producing management information, which was very early on at kind of an associate providing information. I'm not, designing anything. So I was virtually crunching the numbers, providing them. And then obviously at a certain point, you start to understand, okay, well, if I do that slightly different, it gives more information for them, or it gives better information for them. And then later on, when I was responsible for producing the numbers, that was very interesting conversation then when I produced the numbers and like you do budgeting, for example, what will it look like? And then you get sales numbers, and out of the sales numbers, you produce whatever the estimated forecast is. And then you go to business leader, and then he tells you in finance at that time, he tells you, the numbers are not right. They're not good enough. Well, the numbers are correct, but you don't like what they're saying. So just let me correct that.
You don't like the answer. Exactly.
You don't know what the answer is. So the numbers are correct. The numbers are not wrong, but the people are trying to, that is where the exciting part for me started, to explain why the numbers were there. So why is the number here? Why is the number here and not here? That was the interesting part. And that later on went into compliance as well. It's like, we can do this, but this means this. But if you do it a slightly different way, it means much less, and we can maneuver around much easier around certain things. So that is or in compliance also, if you do it that way, you have a higher risk of detection. You have a higher risk of things which can go wrong. If you do it slightly different, maybe even more better for you, then you do reduce the risk, and you may have more opportunities for activities which you maybe not tapping into today. So those type of things is very important. That obviously, that second part is you need to understand your technical capabilities, and then you can apply that to the business. But the important thing is you need to understand what he wants and where the business wants to head.
Yeah. You talked about financial forecasts, and in order to do that, it's not just applying some growth percentage to the various components of the financial statement. It's actually understanding, well, what's going on in these offices and what's going on with these people, and what are the assumptions that we're making, right? Like, financial forecast is just a picture of the future that's based on a bunch of nested assumptions that, in order to have any validity, must be based in some kind of reality, right? Correct. So I just think that bringing that finance mind to compliance, it obviously feeds directly into what you're talking about, but it seems like such a good base. I have a finance background myself, and the thing that I remember
I didn't know.
And I remember being in college and having this light bulb moment with finance in terms of, finance is really just kind of moving dollars through time. That's really what it is, And the light bulb moment came when when I'm figuring out the net present value of something, it's just a bunch of future cash flows that I'm pulling back into sort of time point zero based on some risk factor. And then I was just like, wow, you can price anything. You can price a billboard investment. You can price a new plant. You can price any of these,
absolutely.
Any of these diverse things you can price based on those sort of same assumptions. And this sort of framework of assumptions can be applied to so many different scenarios. And, it's an interesting sort of through line when you're talking about your, base in, your 30-year lesson boiled down to know the business. And it's really kind of rooted in understanding how these different sort of pieces of the watch work in order to, tell the time that you see on your watch. And inherent to that is just a sensitivity to, a business is just like a multivariate equation, right? It's just all of these different functions that have a different sort of weighting on the end result, whether that's some outcome or some return or some enterprise value or whatever. And being able to break down something complex like that and get down to the business. And, again, you can't make that financial forecast without having some understanding of those things. I was on an episode recently on this, and we were talking about how everybody just kind of applies the frameworks that they're most comfortable with. And, I always have this ongoing question on why compliance doesn't start with the business. Why don't we instinctively do exactly what you're talking about? Like there's so many cycles that end up getting wasted from a compliance team that's not focused first on what business am I in? Where is the money coming from? Where is it going? What are the objectives of the organization? To me, that seems so apparent, and yet still, compliance teams struggle to get the budget they need or show their value inside the organization or, get out of this sort of speaking and should, as I call it, and truly kind of connecting to the objectives of the business. How do you think we can get more people in our industry we can't pull them back in time and sort of give them a finance background. And I'm not saying that that's the only path forward, but how do we make that sort of instinct that you've developed more pervasive across the industry of just really tying down to the business and starting with those first principles, and then layering the appropriate sort of compliance program on top of it?
So there are multiple things. So the first thing is, I think, compliance folks are trained in a way that there's a certain framework which you need to apply, and then there are linked to that framework. If that is linked to the DOJ framework, how they investigate stuff, if that is an iOS framework, if that is a different framework, there are some different ones which you can use, and they are learned and they're trained through that one. So that is one of the things which is it's good that we have frameworks. Don't get me wrong. We need frameworks. Don't get me wrong. The thing is, if I'm applying the framework, like the framework is a framework and the business needs to fit to it, then I'm running into that issue. So that's the first thing. How I'm going to build a compliance program. That is the first thing. Second thing, we need more people in compliance who come out of finance functions and or business functions and help to develop that view. Yeah. So there is, unfortunately, I don't want to say that. I'm going to be getting nasty comments potentially here again when I'm saying that, but we have too many lawyers running around alone in compliance. So lawyers come in with a certain way of defending the position they have, and they want to do certain things in a certain way to ensure we are not running into a problem. We want to avoid legal issues, and when we had an issue in the past, we obviously build walls, and then we walling off stuff, and then we getting into trouble. So there are fantastic lawyers in this world who are really great compliance leaders. The unfortunate thing is I think that is not the majority of the people in this field. And their approach is sometimes very lawyery. So like, okay, we need to do X, Y, Z, and blah, blah, blah. Instead of saying, okay, we want to avoid that risk, what we're seeing here from a regulatory perspective, how is that risk coming out of the business? So get back, what is the business doing? Yeah. And then figuring out a way how we can do that in the business to prevent that down the road. Instead, we going in and saying, this is a risk, this is the framework we're applying it. If it works or not, doesn't matter. That's not the way how the business is structured. And compliance cannot restructure the business. And then this frustration starts in the business. The frustration starts in compliance at the same time because they think they don't talk to each other. So often I have seen that in my career. particularly in compliance, is like where compliance people explain something to the business, and you can see how the business doesn't understand them, and then the business explains something to them, and then you look at them and say, yeah, well, they talk like this. I mean, they talk this way. Yeah, they talk just not common language. So, and that is something for compliance leader to think of, is how can I be a translator? So the business needs this is our regulatory stuff. So how can we translate that? How can we talk to the business, say, I understand what you want to do, but can we talk about a different way of doing things?
Well, and that's the perfect metaphor, because going back to your point from before, in order to be a translator, you have to know both languages. You know what I'm saying?
Correct.
You need to know the compliance language, and you need to know the business language if you're ever going to, I can't be a Russian translator if I don't speak Russian. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And actually, I have seen too many failures in my career, both in both sections. So, giving you an example, I will not tell you which of the two companies I was in where that happens. So we're sitting in a meeting, we were doing kind of a review of contracts and those type of stuff, which have an element of financial regulation to it, because there are certain pricing clauses and those type of stuff. And then you talk to the business, and the business says, yeah, the lawyer looks after that one. And the lawyer is in the room, the senior lawyer, the head, top lawyer of the business. No, that's a business responsibility. You know already that went completely, completely.
Yeah.
So the lawyer didn't understand what they need in the pricing clause, because he said there was no risk, potentially even. And the business said, well, yeah, the pricing clause I'm writing, and the lawyer will review it. And they didn't talk to each other. That is I have seen it personally, and I was like, this is amazing. This is just amazing. You can't imagine how that then goes. So that's exactly an example. Another example I had where you were sitting together with operations, actually, with execution type of people, and then you listen to them, and then you realize, yeah, you're doing things, and you assume that was the intention of the business, but it wasn't. So, and therefore, and then you say, yeah, but wait a second, that is not what the trader wanted, and that's not what the credit people approved, and etc. So, and suddenly we sit there and say, okay, hopefully that never went wrong. But I said, well, yeah, but you had two different things in mind, and you didn't understand what the business wanted in that specific situation. Even so, I need to say, operations, trade execution people are usually closer to the business than compliance people, but it happens.
Right. Yeah, there's all of this sort of leakage. There's all this sort of deadweight loss in a company that comes from the kind of talking past each other, or the jump ball risk from these different functions that have just different, it's almost like we're all these different divisions, all these different folks are like watching different movies. You know what I'm saying? We're looking at things
different movie.
Differently. We're watching different movies.
Wait a second, that doesn't match what I'm doing here.
Yeah, exactly. So talk to me a little bit about like the particular moment or mentor or situation that kind of pivoted you from finance into kind of the compliance and risk world. What was that catalyst?
Okay, that catalyst was very interesting. So I was expatriated to Switzerland 20 plus years ago by my old company, DuPont, and then they want to send me back and stay myself in finance. And then in the last 2 years in that role, I worked actually on something called Sarbanes-Oxley compliance. Didn't know that is a compliance role when I started this. I thought myself about internal control specialist team, leading that perfectly fine. I didn't even think about that terminology compliance, a framework for compliance at the time. What pushed me into it, I then went to Cargill, had a role which was called finance manager, but it was really a compliance manager, was actually in a derivatives business trying to figure out where can we operate, how can we operate in different jurisdictions and those type of things. But interesting enough, in the years when I started in Cargill, they didn't have a department which was called compliance. They had compliance roles, don't get me wrong. I mean, there was lots of compliance going on, but there was nobody looking at with a framework of it. Yeah. So, and over the years, we started to develop that one. Eventually, I moved into a formal compliance role, even so my role before was compliance already. And trying to design that. What is the role of compliance? And we had a lot of people, and I need to take my hat before Cargill, helped me to train in that direction is actually we had a lot of engagement with the business, and they're encouraged to engage with the business, and they realize some of these gaps we talked about before. But it's a decade, it's 2 decades of work to implement that in a large company, to change that. But somewhere you need to start, and usually it's good to start at the top with a white paper, for example, and saying, so what do we really need? We're not a bank, for example. We're a commodity trader in this case, or food processor, or whatever you call it. But we're in the physical player in this world. But what do we need? What can we take on, and what we shouldn't take on, and which direction should we take? And that interaction with the business, understanding the business, played always a big role in there. Yeah, but still, we had departments who just process their own way. Yeah. So that happens. And then that's when things went wrong, usually. More often than not. Right.
Yeah. There's this sort of deviation from the script, so to speak, or they're kind of cooking their own recipe, you know? What was surprising? So it sounds like when you went to Cargill, you were doing kind of a finance role that was essentially compliance, and then you pivoted over to like the mothership kind of compliance team. Is that kind of right?
Yeah.
So what was surprising?
We built the mothership of compliance, no? So the function was only formed in 2010, 2011. I don't want to talk too much details here, but that was like in that years there was a form. Again, just for everybody who's listening to that one, Cargill had compliance. Don't get me wrong, but it's
I understand. But it was a more sort of formalization, kind of trying to pursue from a white paper perspective or from a long-term vision perspective. What do we need to grow into? Yeah. And that's normal. I think that's how a lot of teams and a lot of businesses build, their sort of flagship compliance program. But I would bet that you were part of a very diverse group there. It was probably not all finance people. Is that right?
I know lots of lawyers around me. Just to be clear.
I love doing these podcasts because, I get to talk to, all these people and hear all these really cool stories. And the thing that I'm struck with is that our industry is it's not like baseball. In baseball, if somebody makes it to the major leagues, they all played t-ball, and then they played, they played in high school, and then they played in and then they played in college, and then they played in the minors for a little bit, perhaps. And then they're all, they might have different positions and stuff like that, but they all have kind of a similar path into that sort of, apex or top of the mountain, whatever you want to call it. In our industry, it's so different. You have people coming from finance and from legal, and some people coming from business, and some people coming from nursing, and all these different sort of inroads into this thing. When you joined this team that you said there was a bunch of lawyers around, what did you start to see that indicated that, wow, I bring something unique to this experience? Like, I bring a unique perspective to it. What are some of the differences that you saw in that sort of diverse team that you were a part of, that you were like, okay, I can add a lot of value here with this different vantage point that I have?
So it's in the interaction. So it's really in the interaction. So we talked about before about that translating issue and translating from A to B, B to C, and the translation stuff. Then when we started to interact with the middle office, we started to interact with the trade execution, with the business itself, so the trading desk and those type of people around me, some of the operations desk, purchasing department, and some others, and then obviously a lot with tax and legal. So there was 2 other functions there. When you started to interact with them and proactively work with them, so what often happens is you are siloed. Yeah, so people come and say, okay, I need a tax opinion about this. I need a legal opinion about that. And I need to know how I can run it through the system. I ask middle office. Yeah. And then I ask compliance if everything is fine. So, and then you have individual discussions. And obviously that individual discussion, you don't see the total picture. You don't know what the other said and those stuff. So I realized pretty early on that when you understand all of these different elements and you know how they are playing, so there's a key role you can play to bring them together. Proactively exchanging stuff which is going on in the business is helpful. And then working with, when you got a question, working directly with a function as well and involve them very early on, and you have a cross-functional view on it before you go back. So for example, they can ask me a question about regulation. So can I do this trade or this exchange? Can I do that? And why is that? Yeah, I can answer that question. That's perfectly fine. But then they don't tell you a little detail with changing stuff, or
right.
Your input maybe jeopardizes something else because it's not optimal for somebody else, and you could say it also slightly different. So, and there are often multiple options. So, figuring out the best way of doing this, that is where then that thing is. And when you do that, and you do that constantly, then obviously that is what you want to do in terms of the interaction you're having, because then you're adding real value, because you're not giving an opinion and you're seen as like, oh, you're the blocker, it's going to be complex with you. Well, no, it's not complex with me, because I have looked at all of the options, and because all of the options come together, we just need to consider this one part. However, if you're willing to reconsider some other stuff, it might be slightly different. So, and I think that is exactly these discussions need to happen, where you are, as a compliance, not only the subject matter expert, but you are kind of the framework person who is looking at the total picture and say, okay, well, my view on this is this and this way, but if we talk all these people and we get them in one room, and we have a better solution for you potentially.
At my core, I'm like a value creation guy. That's what excites me: creating value, building, having an impact on things, whether it's a company or a person's life or whatever. And I think that's why I get so excited about compliance in general. I mean, I think a lot of people don't see it as like an exciting space. To me, I think it's so exciting because the potential for value impact is so big, because we have this opportunity to really be kind of, to what you're saying, this sort of, like deep context of the business, because we're able to touch all these different parts of the business if we take advantage of that sort of circulatory system potential nature of compliance. And so we have a deep context of the business, and then we have a lot of frameworks that really can be applied in real time if we have the right context, and we know what questions to ask. If somebody's asking a question, can I do this? What they might be leaving out, or what things to kind of check for, that can really end up, really kind of reducing the volatility of the company, right? Like, the company is just a bunch of these like projects and processes and all these different things, and the quality of any process is a function of like what the standard deviation of the output is. And so when we can compress that and we can collapse that and still get the same result, that is a much better kind of situation. So, and
standardize some of this stuff. So the approach can be across to the business. So I just had a call today. That was one of my clients who is in the energy trading here in Europe, and they are small, but they're caught by the whole big picture. And then I started to realize, okay, guys, you are having not only this area of financial compliance, you have a whole another let of areas around this. And we can help you with that one, because obviously that is linked to the other, it's linked to the financial. We can help you, give you a framework to have a more flexibility in that, and also to help you to structure that in an appropriate way. Because we can take some of the burden you're doing today off, because we know how to take it off. Yeah. So, and he was really surprised, it seems to, because he has never saw that as an advantage. He always saw that as a burden. And it's like, okay, well, yeah, but if we have certain information potentially and get certain confirmations, we can do it slightly different for you. So, and that is, they are in there, the business people are, so this is a burden for us. We need to do all these things, and it's very complex. And we can go in and say, yeah, I understand, but how about making a little picture here and saying, so what are all the elements, and what are the indicators? What are the drivers of this? And then can we change these drivers? Can we change the driver in a different direction? And that would allow us to do things differently for you. So that's
That's a perfect example of what kind of is so exciting about it, because, we talked about compliance can be this translator and compliance can be this reframer. That's exactly what you did in the context of what you just talked about. You reframed this thing that looked like a burden to kind of turn that to an advantage. And the siloing that you refer to, that we see all over the place, siloing is not just a compliance thing, it's a business thing. It's like everybody gets siloed. The sales team gets super siloed and the trading team gets siloed. You know what I'm saying? Like, nobody has the context of knowing what all these other departments are doing. And so, again, that's a ton of value to be able to provide to any department you might be talking to give them the context of what the downstream implications are for, another team that they might not really have visibility into.
Yeah, and also, impacts to the group, because there is a certain pattern which is developing, which impacts the total group, because that is the other part of it. So we are also, let me be clear. In my view, I've been always 51% I'm a fiduciary. Yeah. If worse comes to worse, I'm the one saying no, just to be clear. Yeah. I'm 49-1 business. 48-9-1. I'm business. Yeah. So the 2% is a protection I'm providing. Yeah. That's the way I need to be. So have I always been that way? Just to be clear, no. Yeah. There has been tons of situations where I think differently today about. Yeah. But generally speaking, that was my idea, to help the business and understand that. And one of the reasons I think why that can be successful is looking at risk assessment. What are the real risks we are identified with? And then where can you be more flexible and where you need to put the foot down and say, okay, that's not what is going.
Well, that's a great segue into this other kind of topic I wanted to talk about. In our pre-show, you were talking about, you see a lot of people sort of flying blind with respect to risk assessment.
Yeah.
What does that look like? What did you mean by that? What does that look like on the ground? And how do you see people kind of losing, like not getting, like you kind of talked about an ideal with respect to risk assessment. And that ideal is not sort of manifest or like lived out in most risk assessments. So like, I just want to kind of talk about what that gap is and how people can leverage their risk assessments in a more sort of impactful, strategic way.
Yeah. So people are afraid to talk about what does that mean, risk assessment. It's a huge exercise. No, it's often not a huge exercise. So take a startup commodity trading firm somewhere, let's call it Dubai for lack of different words, and they need to go ahead and need to set up a KYC program. There are maybe 5 questions they need to ask to themselves. So what risk do I have from a bribery and corruption perspective? What is a driver? Where's my counterparties? Where's my business partners? I'm often talking about KYB or KYBP because I think it's more about, it's wider because counterparties often have a list. So from a business partner perspective, so where's my anti-bribery risk sitting? Where's my anti-money laundering risk sitting? What are the jurisdictions I am dealing with? What are the risks the jurisdictions bring to me? Both from an incorporation of the counterparty, but also from the banks they're using potentially and those type of things. So, and then there is another set of questions around in which business I'm active. So if I'm in the agriculture business, the risk for KYC is completely different than when I'm in the crude oil business or in the oil business, yeah? Right. If I'm trading predominantly in Europe and Asia and America, the risk for KYC is very different than when I'm trying to get stuff out of Africa, for example. So, and last but not least, I need to think through some of the sanctions risk, which is obviously always a thing which you need to think, particularly in today's world when you think about what's going on globally. But these are the 5-6 questions you need to ask yourself. Yeah. So, and then you look at that one and you classify that between low, medium, and high. Yeah. And then you think about what I'm doing already. What are the things I'm already doing? Yeah, I'm having a report from DNB, for example. I do have this and this and this. And so I have already a lot of information. I'm just not putting it 100% together. And then you go in and say, okay, well, yeah, let's think about how we can build this compliance program around KYBP or KYC for you and build this going forward so that it is scalable for you going forward, because you do something today different than maybe when in the future. So, and the way we went about that was at risk assessment, and we got a lot of good feedback on it, is actually people say, oh, this is fantastic. I can now understand why you'd be doing that, and I can use that to explain why we're spending money on it. So, and that was a simple example. I think the next step for them is actually getting a complete risk register and looking at stuff, yeah? But that any company should have a risk register. So in Cargill, we had a 20+ risk domains total, which we addressed through the compliance program, including food safety, competition, sanctions, and so commodity markets, for example, where the financial risk is included and those type of stuff. And then out of the 22, you had certain corporate programs, yeah, but you didn't have everything as a corporate program. So, for example, child labor is very dominant in certain of the business of cargo, but not in everyone. So, and then you have a different approach to that one potentially than in other areas. So that is the same for other businesses. Yeah. So you don't have the same program for everybody, particularly in big corporations, because that doesn't make sense. And that's when you're coming to your original questions, where a lot of the compliance program go overboard potentially because they do everything for everybody the same way. And that is just not working. So another client of mine is in the financial services industry. They're only dealing with regulated firms. Their KYC issue is minimal. Now they're starting to do something different. They're doing other stuff now. And they may be trading with non-regulated firms, non-financially regulated firms. And that is changing their profile dramatically. Yeah. So that type of stuff, then talking to them and saying, yeah, but now you need something different. And the reason is X, Y, Z. Again, coming from the business. Yeah. I'm not saying to them, you need to change your KYC program. I'm going in and say, okay, you're changing your business profile. You're changing your business activity. You're going outside of what you're doing. And that has these implications. Yeah. In the beginning, when you have 5 counterparties, not a big deal. If that is growing, you suddenly have 100, 200, 300 counterparties. It's becoming a different issue. Yeah.
Right.
And you can then say, okay, in the beginning you do X, Y, Z, and you have this and this, but when you then grow, you maybe need to think about the system. You maybe need to think about this and to adapt the framework going forward. And then you are up relatively quickly when you look at risk assessment, the maturity of your program that you need to address the risk. That is always you need to have in the back of your mind immediately as well.
So when a company is flying blind, what does that look like? Is it just a massive risk register that no one's really doing anything with? Is it just sort of a
not having a risk register, not having one? I have seen that. Or having a risk register which have only competition risk.
Kind of like a singular risk
and something else, and say, oh, that are the only 3 which we are exposed to. Well, yeah, you are exposed because you're in the financial markets. You are in the financial risk area. You have complete other risks, maybe not at the same magnitude, but you have those risks. You can't just ignore them, because the issue is often people look at their 3 big risks and then they leave the rest aside. Yeah, or they're looking at 5 big risks and leave the rest aside. Coming to your comment, they have the risk register and say, only these 3 are interesting. For the rest, we don't do anything. That's wrong. And the other way around, I have 20 risks and I do everything for every of the risk I do is do the same. That's also not right. Yeah.
Right.
And what I'm seeing often where programs fail is they're writing these risk registers. They may be writing a code of conduct, they may be writing some corporate policies, maybe they're writing 10 corporate policies, and then it stops there. At that point, it stops. There is no implementation of it. There is nothing done after that. And when that happens, that's when the highest risk applies for me, because you say, yeah, we have identified this risk. You say you're doing this stuff, which is usually in the policies, yeah, and then nothing afterwards happens. There's zero evidence of any implementation. When that happens, that's the biggest risk area you can be in. And that's what I mean with flying blind. It's like, I have addressed everything and now can go with that big plane into the Grand Canyon and fly high speed. Well, the problem is you haven't understood that your right, left, and center is only millimeters away from the cracks. And that's when the plane crashes. And we both know it takes only one non-compliance event and the whole business can be taken out of business. Yeah. So that gets relatively quickly. So
I'm kind of interested. I've been so interested lately in this kind of false sense of security risk. And there's so many instances of this throughout a compliance program and really kind of throughout a business where it's like, okay, I told everyone to do something. Great. They're going to do it. Okay, I did my risk assessment. Cool. Okay, we have some policy gaps. I'm gonna push out the policies. Okay, great, we're good. And it's like, to your point, it's not good until the behaviors are changed and you've validated and sort of substantiated that the change in behavior is consistent and sustainable.
Correct. And the thing is, you're immediately into that one. What is my risk? What are my processes behind that? What I actively done? So again. It doesn't need to be all the same. Yeah. Some people have it slightly different, some others. I mean, one of my clients has a huge surveillance program for the trading behaviors. One other doesn't have anything, or two others doesn't have a lot or anything at the moment. The one which have that huge surveillance program is perfectly appropriate for them because the way of their running their business. For the other one, that would be a complete overkill. But doing nothing is maybe also not the right thing. But that is not their main risk, not doing monitoring. They have other things in front of that one. If you go through they have still a lot of in the prevent area to do. So that type of stuff. So it depends all what it is. So that goes back to it needs to be appropriate for it. But nothing and or stopping at an early point, not having done the whole cycle, that's when the risks start. That's when I'm saying they're flying blind because they think they have done things, but they don't get feedback. They don't get signals. They can be cooking something in the background and you have an issue.
Yeah. And, I don't want to like pave over it or like pay it short shrift because it is a difficult thing to manage through. I mean, it's a sort of pervasive problem because it's difficult. And how do you validate that? Like, how do you know the extent to which you have a false sense of security in any area? It's very hard to know.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying?
It's very hard to know. But I can tell you there are some indicators. There are some red flags which are coming.
Sure.
Up.
Okay.
So, and one of the red flags is, for example, no risk register. Yeah. So you don't even have done an inventory of what risk you may be running. Yeah. If you have a risk register, what have you done with that risk register? Yeah. So how did you assess a risk? Do I qualify it? You maybe found some. I'll give you an example. We have talked about payment policies with somebody where they don't do cash payments. They don't accept cash payments. The whole cash payment problem related to anti-money laundering walks out of the door. Yeah, for them, because they don't have a cash business. They don't even have a petty cash anymore for office expenses. They don't. Yeah. So you don't have that issue anymore. It just walks out of the door. Yeah. Because there is a policy having zero cash. Yeah.
Right.
As long as that is enforced and it's relatively simple to enforce, you don't have a problem. You don't need to think about that one anymore. So others may not have that opportunity and they need a program around that. Yeah. And they may have a program around that one, but then they're doing the program and limiting it very much to a certain part of the business which takes cash. Yeah. And then later on, you just look at them and say, well, wait a second, you have these transactions here with, some of the Russian stuff in the past, or you have some transaction into Africa because you're selling things and you don't review those parties. Yeah, but they don't do cash. Okay, fine. So what can you say then later? Yeah, so that's exactly where your false sense of security comes in, because you need to do KYC, you are obligated because you're taking cash. That's one of the rules in this jurisdiction. Yeah. But you then say, okay, well, that's great that you're doing that, but why are you not looking at, so what is my total anti-money laundering? What's my total sanction problem, which I'm dealing with? Because, by the way, it's a low-risk country, but there are still people from Russia living from other jurisdictions where you have a sanctions risk. Yeah. So, but then they don't go that step and actually falling short of it and saying, yeah, well, we have sorted that all out and da-di-da-di-da. We only focus on these people. Sorry, and then you say, well, yeah, you don't need to do the same program for everybody, but why are you not doing that next step and saying, I classify all my business and for the high-risk areas, I do something. Yeah.
Right.
So, and that's when things get blind flying from my point of view, is like, the solution might be that you don't do anything. Maybe that can be the outcome. But you haven't done the assessment. You have not risk assessed the rest of your portfolio, period. And that is where the things fall apart.
From like a risk assessment process, like what do you think, many times the process that an organization does is a function of the tools that they have had in place or been given or whatever, right? Like, it's kind of like a tree growing around a fence. It's like, this is sort of something that's sort of fixed in place, and like the tree ends up kind of growing around it and kind of absorbing into it. If you think about a risk assessment sort of process, what do you think those major phases are, and where do you think the biggest gaps are? We talked a little bit about, not having a risk register and so forth, but like from a flowchart perspective, or from like an annual or quarterly cadence perspective, like how do you think about that, and where do you think the areas are that people kind of fall short, and where do you think the biggest opportunities to add value to the business are?
So first of all is starting the risk assessment again. We had that discussion before from a business perspective. What has changed in the business? So if I'm having a risk register, what has changed in the business? What are the things which have changed, and what are the potential implications to my risk register? If I don't have a risk register, just going through the business and say, okay, what are the risks we are exposed to? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And not
kind
only
of forming that inventory, as you said.
Yeah, just having that inventory. Yeah. The second thing is thinking about risk assessment at a very high level. So a few key questions you can ask. I talked about the KYC stuff before, which is a very small part of the business. But how can I ask within a very limited question myself, what are the risks I'm exposed to? And then I can think of, so what are the processes and functions I'm having which are dealing with that one? So, and out of that one, I already have a relatively stable risk assessment. And I already have an idea what are the controls around that one. From there, I can develop relatively simple, and even it's maybe a qualitative assessment in the very beginning if I'm starting this process, where I'm going to focus and why I'm going to focus on things, and then start this to improve that and also demonstrate the value you can bring, because you maybe find stuff which the business didn't know about and there are risks they didn't want to take. Yeah.
Right.
So giving you an example with certain things in delivery, for example, in commodity trading, some people don't understand that the title movement is maybe not the same time when risk moves on ships, for example. And sometimes people don't understand that. So title maybe moves in the port of destination, but risk already moves in the port of load. And some people don't know that it has to do with Incoterms, with the transportation terms and those type of stuff. Some people don't understand that. So where's my risk sitting? This is a very, concrete, very detailed example in the commodity trading industry. There are tons of these examples out there where that is. So, and they're falling short on, I have done risk assessment and now I'm done. Yeah.
Right. Check,
later
box
then
check,
things fall apart. Right. Or they have done everything and now have implemented everything, and then for the next 4 years I'm not looking at it anymore.
Yeah, and
I just run the process.
Controls are working.
Yeah. So that is when things go really wrong, and they're then potentially even more dangerous than doing nothing. That's the other part of it. Yeah. So if you don't know, sometimes it's worse than knowing and not doing anything about it.
Man, well, we're getting kind of to the end here. I got a couple more questions. I could have talked to you for another hour.
Then I need another.
What else is kind of top of mind in our last couple of minutes here?
So top of mind right now is actually thinking about the geopolitical issues you're dealing with. There are tons of them running around. Some of them are security. I mean, if you have people in the Middle East at the moment, you have real danger of that. The thing is also with the geopolitical situation we're in, our protection areas like contracts, like clauses on contracts, like processes we haven't really challenged because we're in unpredictable territory. We have the Strait of Hormuz.
It's changing every day almost.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, well, depends when a tweet comes out on social.
Exactly. It changes every tweet. Right.
So, there is an unpredictable moment. You need to think about that one and have that in your mind. You're dealing potentially with force majeure situation, which you haven't had in the past. You may not, because you're not in commodity trading, but you're downstream. You may be depending on a commodity you don't even know which comes from there, and you're suddenly dealing with some issues. So I think it's highly volatile. I think also it's not as predictable anymore. So you don't know. I mean, let's call it the West. I mean, it's maybe the wrong term. The US, the NATO, the Europeans pretty much aligned. I don't think that is the case anymore.
Right.
There are changes in that when the US did something, the UK did, the Europeans did. So you knew what you're dealing with. That is not the case anymore. So But also not thinking about that from a risk, but also thinking that from an opportunity perspective. There might be opportunities for you. So there might be huge opportunities you don't even see because you're scared about the risks. So, for example, one of my clients said once to me, I said, well, with a sanctioned country, I can't deal with it. Well, yeah, it's not easy, but there might be ways of dealing with them. And if you can deal with them because you have the infrastructure to deal with them, because you can provide food, for example, or you can provide other products which are non-military because that's not falling, or you can have a licensee from the OFAC or something, you maybe make good money there, very good money, because they're happy to get the products in. Now, there are risks with this, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't mean a sanctions country you can't deliver to. You have higher risks. So we had those discussions back and forward. But that is one example of where I think there are opportunities today out there, which, because people maybe don't understand the risks, not even considering.
Yeah, this is like the second time or the third time in this conversation where you've been able to kind of reframe in a creative way a threat into an opportunity. And I think, to your point, in a volatile market, there's always, just think about a stock market. When a stock market's super volatile, yeah, sometimes you want to stay away from it. But also, if you can get involved, like, people make a lot of money in volatile markets. And that, I think, is a metaphor for the choppy waters that our organizations are going through. Need a creative, high context, high agency sort of mind that should reside in the compliance department to help navigate through that and find opportunities both to like mitigate risks that were maybe unforeseen, that we have this sort of false sense of security around, and also opportunities to expand into areas that, we maybe thought was a foregone conclusion that we couldn't even sort of touch with a 10-foot pole. I mean, there's just a lot of opportunity when things are moving around like this, Again, there's threats, of course, but being able to see both sides of it can open up some alpha, so to speak.
And then the other thing is, my biggest regret with Cargill is I was too internal focused. I was not enough external focused. Not hiring consultants, I mean, that is maybe not the solution to it, but having conversations in your industry, having conversations with other compliance professionals, having conversations within the company, that goes back to getting out of your silos, is very important in this environment, but generally speaking is very important, which can help you to identify these blind spots, which we talked about before.
Right.
Because maybe somebody says, oh yeah, we had a big deal here. We did deal with a bribery issue and we didn't even know it was existing until we found out there is potential issue, or we haven't covered it properly. So, and then things are going there. And then obviously the other thing is, in this environment, look at your controls. Are the controls operated? Are they functioning? Are you getting the feedback you need? Because often controls in this environment are really important to get an early indication.
They're important, and perhaps the controls you had a year ago, they aren't even applicable now, or maybe they're not functioning because we're so far outside of tolerance or something. Like, to your point, it's a little bit kind of all over the place.
Yeah. So that's I think from a macro perspective is like, think about what you have and what you're getting is very important. And that might mean talking to a consultant, talking to a firm who come in and just look at your program and gives you an idea, because they're not blind. They're not assuming anything. What I learned, and I need to say I'm the first one around that one, is like, in Cargill, when somebody came to me and asked me a question, I already knew the answer almost for guaranteed, because obviously that guy worked 10 years with me. I know how he's functioning.
Right.
Relatively, I don't think I missed a lot, but relatively, I would say, well, go to that other person. Don't talk to me, because I already have a pre-fitted opinion, because that would be helpful at times. Not always, don't get me wrong. I mean, it's good that you have that experience, but sometimes it would be better to also talk external and talk through stuff. That is my biggest regret with when I was in Cargill, that I didn't do that enough to have an external contact and those type of things. Various reasons why that happens. Could talk about the next 2 hours about it, and that's the function of a corporate. You have so much internal, particularly in compliance, you have so much internal stakeholders you need to deal with, which you need to feed with information, you need to reply to questions. You have some degree of protection you need to do internally. We all know that. So you have to do some of that stuff as well. And then obviously the time you have left to do that external stuff is probably limited, if non-existing, but it is very helpful. It's very healthy to have that external.
Yeah, it is very healthy. It's, I saw this, I don't know, it was like an article or something. I'm going to kind of get this a little bit wrong, but it was talking about how lucky people are the ones that there's a high correlation between, people who are lucky or who kind of see other opportunities and their willingness to like do things differently. Okay. So like take a different route to work or go to a networking event or take a call with somebody or whatever. And like what it ends up boiling down to is they just end up adding a lot more nodes to their network, so to speak. And I think that's a good metaphor for exactly what you're talking about. If you're having conversations sort of outside of the silo that is your organization, let's say your whole organization is de-siloed, but you start to get this sort of myopic view of the world and sort of this fixed view of the world when you can talk to somebody like a consultant or network more or just expose yourself to more information and more perspectives. All that goes into the sort of goal seek mechanism that is your mind, and you start to see new opportunities within your organization. And, so much of expertise and so much of like potential impact is really like both an expansion, we kind of talked about this a little bit before, an expansion of context, but also an expansion of pattern recognition, and so sometimes you get like a little bit fixed
you get different
on that pattern recognition. Exactly.
Yeah, you get different perspective. You get the ability to take a different view on stuff, which you didn't do before. You have a certain way of looking at that one because you are biased. You are company biased. You're biased by the own way of working. And when when you are getting feedback from external, you suddenly, maybe that's correct what he's saying. I didn't see that. Yeah. Right. So, and that's refreshing for me being a consultant because I'm actually that external person in a lot of cases. And also for me, I'm learning a lot from the internal people. I get a lot back. I'm not saying that sometimes, but I get a lot back from them because they're giving me ideas of doing things differently.
Totally. Yeah, you can see that, this company did this way and this company did this that way. And all those things are kind of adding more paints to your palette. You know what I mean?
Correct. And you hearing the problems they're having. Okay, well, you're right. That might be a problem. Let me think about that one again. And then you think, there's a couple of others I can talk to about this because there's a problem. There's a real problem. Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. Well, Mike, thank you so much. Tell us a little bit about your organization so people who are interested in working with you can reach out to you. And I just really enjoyed this conversation. This was awesome.
Me too. It was fantastic to be here. The sync on the side, you need to think about something that's very irritating, that rotating thing that is there on the screen on the side.
I love it. I can't get enough of it. This is a reminder of how unpredictable life is. Okay?
So it's irritating to me.
I'm surprised you were like this the whole call. Okay.
No. I mean, people can reach out to me. It's not a problem when they want to have a conversation. I'm happy to have a conversation. I mean, the world is getting different out there. I think the compliance people will be needed more than ever to sort all that out, what we're dealing with in the next couple of months, years to come. So happy to have a conversation.
Cool. Very good. All right, man. Well, thanks for joining us on the Ethics Experts. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you. Talk to you soon, Nick. Bye.